There's a new ACEP News Alert available now. Listen to Dr. Rob Anderson, co-founder of Merit Health, explain why every emergency physician should take the new and anonymous ACEP Emergency Medicine Compensation Survey. Search ACEP News Alert in this podcast player to listen. Follow the channel to get every update on your mobile device as it happens.
Ryan Stanton here with ACEP Frontline, and today we're joined by the ACEP President, Dr. Tony Cirillo, and this is one of those situations where it came about over the last couple of days simply because of this is something when people say, what does ACEP do, or what's the ROI, or whatever it is, this is part of it because the college fighting on a daily basis for your practice and to avoid advanced scope of practice and protecting the physician-led team. And so this is one of those things, and we'll dive in from the beginning and kind of give you the lead up to what was going on that gets us to the new ACS COT announcement on the level 4 trauma criteria and, most importantly, the staffing piece of that. So, Dr. Cirillo, thanks for joining me here on the front line.
It is my pleasure, Dr. Stanton, to be here with you.
Why, thank you.
You're welcome.
I appreciate it. So let's dive right in. Give us a little background on kind of how this all came about.
So I would tell you the first we got wind of this a little bit was back over a year ago, June of 25. And at that time, ACEP, I was attending a meeting of the American College of Surgeons Committee of Trauma. And we have had liaisons. So I'll give a shout out to both Dr. Jeff Goodlow and Dr. Kristen McCabe-Klein, who have been our liaisons for a while. But I got to go to a meeting and they talked about this educational program that they wanted to do with rural trauma centers. And we were like, education sounds good. What could go wrong? Well, it turns out by November, what we found out was not only were they proposing education, but they were proposing guidelines essentially for verification of level 4 trauma centers, particularly in rural areas. And included in that was that the emergency department could be staffed by a non-physician, could be staffed by an NP or a PA, and still get ACS COT green check. And we basically said, whoa. The standard of care now in this country, and has been for 55 years, is that those people staffing emergency departments should be EM residency trained. And we basically said, this is a foundational moment of the specialty. Because you were then involved in it, this then flared up in Kentucky. And I'll let you tell the story of the Kentucky legislation that kind of really turned the heat up on this. But the foundational question that we really put back to the ACS COT is, hey, do you believe we're a specialty or not? Because if you do, then this is not acceptable. So that really became a foundational core crux of our specialty. I don't want to say we drew a line in the sand, but we knew that we had to not let that get through.
And so kind of rolling forward, and back in, it may have been earlier than 25, but around then I was named as the KMA representative to the Kentucky Trauma Advisory Council, so the KTAC. And one of the first meetings, it was this hospital group here in Kentucky that was pushing for the permission and our advice to the governor and his team that it would be okay for this hospital system to create level 4 trauma centers with no physicians involved. And, the idea being, and it's a noble consideration to say we're trying to improve access in terms of being able to open new places where we feel like we can't get physician involvement in terms of getting folks moving there and committed to the area. But we do know from the other states that have passed the physician in every emergency department legislation that it really is more of, getting just pushed to the task of hiring folks. People will go there. You just have to commit to getting folks there. And we were actually, as the Kentucky ACEP, we were working all through 25 on getting legislation. So the physician in every every ED legislation. And so in January, when we opened up our legislative session, we had our House bill, which was filed, that was 107, talking about the physician in every ED. It was the original language that we had, which was a board-certified emergency physician in every emergency department, with the idea being we felt like there would be some negotiation and likely end up where most have ended up at some point, which is a physician in every emergency department, with the gold standard through ACEP being that we want to see a board-certified emergency physician in every emergency department. And then on the other side, Senate Bill 12 came out, which was the bill that was from this hospital system talking about a level 4 trauma centers and pushing forward that they could be run by nurse practitioners with no emergency physicians involved. The person who pushed it on our side with the Kentucky Trauma Advisory Council got very upset that we would not advise it as a green check for the governor, and so brought it to the legislature. And that's when we pushed forward. And the interesting piece of it is they used a misinterpreted piece of a policy within ACEP about the supervision of nurse practitioners and PAs in severely or incredibly rural areas of this country, which Kentucky is not. There are places in this country where you're hours away, and the volume of citizenry in that area does not support necessarily a full-size emergency department that's going to see 30, 40,000 people a year. And so I'll bounce it back to you here. Now we got into the initial aspect of Kentucky, and now we're bringing this back, what they're using against us, which is not only this piece from ACS COT, but also our own policy against us.
Yeah, and they were using a part of our policy, which is always very convenient when you want to believe what you want to believe. And our previous policy about supervision of NPs and PAs did have for rural emergency hospitals and critical access hospitals a provision that said it could be staffed by an APP, but only if that APP presented every case to a physician. And we wrote it that way because we knew that people would go, well, wait a minute, if they've got to present every patient 24/7, 365, why would I have them there by themselves? So the surgeons kind of missed that really important part of that policy. So the policy was pretty good to start with. But when they said, and then others said, oh, no, your policy says it's okay for these departments to be staffed by just an APP, the first thing we did is we said, we need to change the policy. And so in January of this year, 26, the ACEP board voted to revise the language into policy to make it crystal clear that every emergency department should be staffed by a physician. And as Ryan has said, the gold standard is always a residency trained board certified emergency physician. At the same time, look, what ACEP does is ACEP takes on the responsibility to go have conversations with people who are involved on an issue. And we do that intentionally behind the scenes to start. Because if you really want to have a conversation with somebody, if you throw it out in a spotlight, you put people in a position where it's hard for them to feel like they can really negotiate or listen without looking like you made them look bad. So my approach, and I think our approach, is always, well, let's go have a quiet conversation first. And having a quiet conversation with the surgeons was really helpful because we understood their why. And they truly believe, and I think we would support that their verification programs, not just for trauma, but all of their surgical niches, so to speak, do raise the bar of care because they create more than just the standard of staffing. It is about education. It is about having a champion in the department. It is about keeping a log, a registry. And they truly believe, and I think we would all believe, that when they do that, yes, they raise the bar. And so we acknowledged that and said, look, we understand what you're trying to do. But then we really said, look, foundationally, either emergency medicine is a specialty or it's not. And this is where we utilized our other relationship strength, which was within the AMA. And we reached out to our AMA, the folks, Steve Epstein and Hillary Fairbrother, who lead the ACEP delegation for the AMA, but also to particularly Marilyn Heine, who's been a longtime ACEP member, who's on the National AMA board. And we said, hey, Marilyn, look, we know that the AMA has already discussed this, and the House of Delegates had come up with a policy that was really well written, which said, hey, every emergency department should be staffed by a physician. And that was our compromise. It doesn't say emergency physician, but it says physician. And the other really key component of the AMA policy is it said that the only time there should be an exception to that is if the state medical association agrees there should be an exception. Because look, there are rural parts of Alaska where we would go, look, we might give a little bit there, right? But the reality is what we didn't want was a political body or a hospital association letting them decide when there should be a rural exemption. Because as Ryan just said, in Kentucky, the definition of rural got really small really quickly. So we reached out and had multiple conversations with the representatives from the ACS COT, as well as with the AMA, and made it very clear that this was a foundational line in the sand issue for us. And I will say, reaching out in good faith and having conversations and being able to explain why this was so foundational to our specialty got us the result, honestly got us, I think, a better result than we were hoping for. It got us the result that we were wishing for. And I'll let Ryan talk about what happened in Kentucky, and then we'll kind of close that story with what has come out from the ACS COT.
And that's the interesting piece here is, as this evolved between this and Oregon, I've got a new talk that's coming up that I think the first time I'm giving it is in Colorado. It's called that the best advocacy is not always loud. And it really is about the relationships and being able to have those conversations with leaders. And at some point you do have to be out there. You do have to be very forward and loud and those types of things. But for the most part, many things within organizational and medicine in general, just emergency medicine as well, it's about the relationships that we build over the years and the people that we know and the people that we can reach out to. And I consider being somebody who came from the world of surgery, starting off in surgery before emergency medicine, I consider surgeons my friends. My father is one. Interestingly, my father was a vascular surgeon. The current president of the ACS is a vascular surgeon. And so, it's those relationships that I think are very, very important. And so, we've changed the ACEP policy, which now conveniently aligns with our EDAC, with our ED accreditation program, which was the goal. And that was really the guide to say we want our policies to be consistent because that had just recently been approved by the ACEP board. And then we came back and we had letters from ACEP, AMA, AAEM, all the players involved that said, hey, listen, this is not how this was intended to be. You pointed out something that could be misinterpreted in our policy. We fixed it. But here's where our position is. And so it did pass. Interestingly, if you've never seen the videos, it's probably available on EM Docs out there about where we got to go to testify in front of the Health Committee. And the pro got like 20-something minutes, which means they ate into our time, the con time, and so we got 3 minutes. And so we had two emergency physicians, one academic and one very rural, who were speaking on our behalf and had to summarize their 10 minutes of testimony into 3 minutes. And and unfortunately, it still passed the Senate. But through our relationships we had with the House, including the people that were pushing our bill for a physician every ED, it never made any traction from there. And since then, we've had even more progress. So this was all before we went to Leadership and Advocacy Conference in Washington, D.C., and that's when we made the next huge step. So we really were able to use the positions of the AMA. And, of course, as I mentioned right here, we've got the board-certified emergency physician as the gold standard, but understanding the role within the landscape of emergency medicine across the country of other physicians that help us in terms of staffing these emergency departments and taking care of patients, but also feel that it should be an MD or DO that is leading that team within that department. So then we go to Washington, D.C., and as usual, we have a few things. Of course, the king's in town, so now the house is in town. We get to see the king. It's very interesting that he's there on our 250th anniversary. That is very odd. It would be like, I don't know, whoever played the New England Patriots on most of their victories and then going to the White House with them. But we're already there. So we are in Washington, D.C. We get great meetings, but Tony and I get to skate out a little bit early for a meeting. So tell them about this meeting.
Yeah. So in your advocacy toolkit, you've gotta have a variety of tools. And so I'm going to throw my little quote about advocacy, which is sometimes a whisper can be more effective than a bullhorn. And sometimes sitting down in front of someone is more effective than doing it over Zoom or certainly over email. And so we asked for a meeting with the surgeons, and we sat down in the room with Executive Director of the ACS, Dr. Patricia Turner. We sat down with the president of ACS, who, interesting, I had met at their big annual meeting because representing ACEP, I got to sit in their opening ceremony. But before the opening ceremony, we were having breakfast, and I sat with the president of the ACS. And it's those few minutes where you get to meet people and get to introduce yourself. And he remembered that. And so I would again encourage all of you, anytime you get to sit down, meet new people, you never know when your paths are going to cross again. So always take that opportunity to get to meet new people, and someday that even those few minutes can make a difference. So we sat down with them, and we really had this heart-to-heart discussion and explained to them that, look, when the American College of Surgeons says something, that means something, and particularly in the hospital environment. And if they were to say it would be okay to staff any ED with just an NP or PA, that would really undermine the entire foundation of emergency medicine. And we really kind of laid it out for them. And you could tell in that meeting that they got it. They understood, because it's more than just the words, right? It's when you're physically present in front of somebody that it makes a difference. And so Ryan, Mike Fraser, our executive director, and I, came out of that meeting, and I think we felt pretty good at that point that we had been heard. And then fast forward, we were waiting to hear, well, what were they going to do? All right, we had pled our case. We had made it crystal clear. We had changed our policy. We had referenced what the AMA had done, and then we were waiting. And I will say we found out unofficially a couple of months ago, but officially the ACS COT just published their updated the optimal care of the injured patient guideline for level 4, and they have, for that staffing component, 2 parts of that. Section 3.2, not that I've read it a few times and memorized it, says there needs to be a physician in every emergency department 24/7, 365. The other part of that, it says, is that if requested, that physician has to be at the bedside of a trauma patient within 15 minutes. So it actually puts even to some degree a higher standard than I think many of us expect, which is, look, it's hard sometimes to get to the bedside in 15 minutes, but this clearly says in those areas, they appreciated that the role of the physician, the emergency physician, and the training that we bring makes a difference. And then the second part, section 3.3, talks about nurse practitioners and PAs, APPs, and it references at the bottom of that section our college policy about the supervision of NPs and PAs. And I was certainly surprised at that. I thought they would hear us and understand the importance of saying it has to be a physician. And they referenced the AMA House of Delegates statement about that. But in their guidelines now, they reference our policy from January of 26 that talks about what is the appropriate supervision of NPs and PAs. So I think, again, this was clearly a team effort. So kudos to Mike and Ryan, also Dr. John Fish, who's our Associate Executive Director for Clinical Affairs at ACEP and an emergency physician himself. This took a lot of voices. Again, kudos to Steve Epstein and Hillary Fairbrother, Marilyn Heine, but this was a collaborative team effort by this college, by ACEP. And I want to I'm going to toot our horn here. There was nobody else, no other organization was involved in this conversation that got this to be what it is today. And as Ryan started out saying, if you want to know what's the value of ACEP, this is a value of ACEP that 99.9% of our members never even knew was happening. And yet we got the result that needed to happen by using all of our toolkits, all of our relationships, and being willing to stand up and say, this is not acceptable. Even within the House of Medicine, and stand up to the surgeons and say, you have to hear us on this and you have to understand and you've got to change the policy. And they did.
And I, of course, want to say thank you, to the American College of Surgeons for being so receptive, because they are clearly the big dog in the yard with regard to the management of trauma. But as we note, 98% of folks who come into these emergency departments that are even trauma centers, especially in rural, is still emergency medicine, the general side of non-traumatic emergency medicine. And so the concern was that 2% would dictate the other 98%. And the interesting piece of this, when this was first coming across, I was talking to one of the very preeminent physicians, surgeons in our area, one that I trained with and respect highly, and talked about it. And I said, so would this say it's okay for NPs to do trauma surgery? And he says, well, absolutely not. And I said, so in that case, you're willing to give away my job, but not your job. And he sat back in a second. He says, well, I hadn't thought about it that way. And that's the challenge with what we deal with emergency medicine, is when other specialties speak on behalf of emergency medicine with regard to something that does come into our space, often it impacts the entire environment of emergency medicine. And so that's why it's important for us as emergency physicians, ACEP, and the organizational piece of emergency medicine to stand firm that this is a specialty, that every one of us that has got those ABIM, ABOM title after our name, MDDO, you fought for that. You trained for that. This is a specialty of which you have trained for. And it has been very fruitful in terms of these relationships, and hopefully relationships that we can continue to foster as we move forward. So kind of any wrapping up thoughts that you have with regard to this and what it means? Because one thing I do want to mention is that with this fight in Kentucky, I almost forgot about it, which I didn't forget about it because I just texted them yesterday, was the fact that we had a group of emergency physicians. This is the most emergency physicians I have ever seen in Kentucky be activated and mobilized for anything. And it was very organic. And this wasn't just one academic center. It was U of L and UK, both the physicians being involved, but also community emergency physicians, large group, small group, it doesn't matter, were involved. And we had this group out of Ephraim McDowell. I had actually used to moonlight with them. Dr. Eric Grant and his group there, wonderful physician that trained up at University of Louisville, and I consider a friend. He came up and assisted us on some of the days we had up at the Hill. And he says, man, I didn't realize this is what ACEP did. I didn't realize that you fought like this for emergency physicians in Kentucky. And I was like, yes, we actually do this in every state. And with regard to scope, it happens to be every state, almost every single year. And he says, wow, in that case, we're in. And so the roles of emergency medicine, KCEP almost gained another representative at the council this year. We're within about 10, but his entire group went from 0 to 100% club because of that. And I appreciate that. And he's already committed to continue to fight. Their group continue to fight. And that is a rural hospital, two hospitals in our area that are very strong hospitals and that I appreciate. But that's what we're talking about. And that's why I wanted to do this podcast, because I texted him yesterday and we had this conversation. And I said, well, Tony, I'd love to have your conversation with this, because this is the parts where people say, what is ACEP doing? This is one little piece of that we're doing every day.
And I 1,000% agree with you on all of that, Ryan. I would also like to, again, give a public thanks to the American College of Surgeons who engaged in this in a way where they clearly kept an open mind, right? And if you ever think that you're not going to be able to win, you'd be surprised. But if you approach it the right way and you give people the chance to listen, you give them the chance to understand, and you give them a chance to say, you know what, maybe we need to change, but you got to give some grace to let them do that, right? So public embarrassment doesn't work well. Nobody likes to be called out in public. The other message here, and Ryan, you briefly talked about Oregon, is that the strength of ACEP is our chapters. And your work in Kentucky, the work in Indiana about physician in every ED, which then spread to South Carolina and Virginia, the work about corporate practice of medicine really happens at the chapter level, because a lot of these issues are not federal issues, they are state issues. So my plea to all of you is to, if you really want to be part of these, not just fights, but these ongoing conversations and these relationship building, is to get involved at the chapter level. You can make a big difference, and you can be the person who picks up the flag on a particular issue and leads on that issue if it really matters, if that's your issue, if that's your why. So really, that's the strength of this college. It's not Ryan and I, it's that there's 40,000, almost 40,000 of us who believe in the specialty, who believe in what we are doing, believe in taking care of patients the right way. Boy, that's a lot of voices and that's a lot of power. So please get involved at the chapter level. We certainly would welcome your interest in your engagement at the national level, whether it's through a committee or a section. But this is about showing up, and it's about being part of the fight every day, because you never know when you will be that person that leads on an issue that makes a difference.
How can folks get in touch with you if they have any questions or want to get involved? Of course, getting involved with ACEP is easy because you just go online and look for the American College of Emergency Physicians, and it shows up as the first 57 pages of everything that's going on. So how can folks get in touch with you? Because yours is a little bit different of an ACEP email address.
Well, actually, you can do, my ACEP email is Cirillo, so Cirillo, at acep.org. However, we also have these little things once a month called Talk with Tony. So the next Talk with Tony is actually coming up on this week on August 5th. I believe that's Wednesday night, 6 p.m. Central, I think, 7 Central. Go on the website, go on the ACEP website, go towards the bottom of the page. There's a Talk with Tony link. You can register to join. It's basically an open Zoom call. This is really an opportunity just to have a conversation. And there's no agenda, and we can talk about whatever topics you all want to talk about. And I know, look, Ryan, I'm going to give him a little props here, is the king of communication. I know that our comms will only continue to increase. But the message is that the president, the board, look, we are all part of this same team. Getting elected and being involved in a certain way is no more important than any other way. So everybody's voice matters. Every issue matters. So happy to hear from folks, happy to talk with folks, and truly have been honored to serve as president over the past 11 months with a couple more down the home stretch here.
All right, talking with Dr. Tony Cirillo, president of the American College of Emergency Physicians, and this is going to probably release the day after that talk with Tony. So look for the one in September. I assume the first Wednesday in September, and then we go from there. I think you've got to count until October 4th when you get to put on the blue jacket with the past president emblem, and let me take the tomatoes for a minute.
And be happy to. And be very proud to pass you the gavel, my friend.
Well, I appreciate it. And as for me, you can contact me, rstanton@acep.org, rstanton@acep.org. I encourage you all to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite player. Please give us a 5-star rating, because that is how we get boosted up in the playlist so other people can discover us. You can also help out by spreading the word with your friends, neighbors, family, and colleagues. And until next time, I'm Dr. Ryan Stanton, and this has been some ACEP Frontline.
If you're not on the front lines, you're on the sidelines.
Cue the music.
Bow, bow, bow.
There. Quiet place, all
Yeah.
alone. Da, da, da.